Welcome to the Construction Leading Edge. My name is Todd DeWalt. My job here is to help you grow your leadership skills, grow your business, and grow your income. In this episode, I interview Will Hodges. He's the president of Cadence McShane Construction Company, a general contractor located in Dallas, Houston, and Austin, Texas. They have about 135 employees, and annual revenue is somewhere in the neighborhood of $260 million. During this interview, we talk about how Will made the transition from project management and operations into executive leadership. We talk about the importance of company culture. We talk about the critical importance of workforce development in the industry. And we also talk about how to be strategic with your business and your career. But before we get into the interview, I have two resources that I want you to check out. First, are you practicing lean design and construction? Well, now you can actualize the promise of lean with Newforma Lean Planner visualization software. Built for companies using lean methods to improve reliability, Newforma Lean Planner slashes administrative chores while improving your reporting. It's powered by LeanKit. Newforma's Lean Planner software makes it easy for you to generate PPC and other key reports that you need to succeed. For more information about Newforma's Lean Planner software, go to newforma.com/lean.
Oh, hi, Mom. How are you? I'm okay. Yeah, business is a little slow. Sure, I've got the time. Really? Offers to buy my products? Over $1.5 trillion in business each year? And it's free. And it's run by the people? Not some corporation or government agency? americasbiz.net. Cool. I got it, Mom. I bookmarked the site, and I'll use it to generate more sales for my business. Thanks. I guess moms do know best. I love you too.
americasbiz.net, where America does business. So, without further ado, here is my interview with Will Hodges. Will Hodges, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Well, for the folks that are listening that aren't familiar with you, could you introduce yourself and talk about what you do and the company you're with?
Sure. My name's Will Hodges. I'm the president of Cadence McShane Construction. We're a general contractor, Texas-based. Headquarters is in Dallas. We have offices here in Dallas, Houston, Austin, and San Antonio. And we focus on 5 market sectors. So we have an education group, primarily K-12 education. We have a commercial sector, and that's developer-driven office, industrial, and retail projects. We have a housing group, which is multifamily and senior living primarily. And then we have a manufacturing and production, which is food and beverage type, light manufacturing, food and beverage type projects, cold storage, production lines, that type product. And then we have an end user, which is similar to the commercial, but instead of working for developer clients, that's working directly for the end user. And that's really just driven around how those clients buy versus the product type itself. So that's where we work and the projects we work on. I've been with the firm for a little over 3 years. I was hired in from outside to take over from a gentleman who had retired. My partner is in Chicago, a guy named Jim McShane, and I've been in Dallas for a little over 20 years now.
So what kind of metrics can you share about Cadence McShane? Number of employees, annual revenue, et cetera?
Sure. Today, and this is changing daily, almost hourly, based on the growth that we're seeing in Texas. We're at about 135 employees spread between those 3 markets. It's most heavily concentrated in Dallas, probably 50 to 60% of that's in Dallas, then Austin, and then Houston. And Houston's a bit of a restart market for us. From a revenue perspective, and we focus more on earnings, but I'll talk about revenue because that seems to interest people more. We are this current year we're in, and our year just ended at the end of September, so we just started our new fiscal year. We did about $260 million in revenue. Current backlog, contracted backlog for work in place for fiscal year 16, the year we're in. We're tracking at about $400 million. that's a combination of growth, but also we had a number of impacts through the spring and summer here in Texas with the weather we experienced, and so a lot of our revenue, we would have been closer to 290 to 300. So we shifted 50 million or so revenue into 16. So it's not as big a jump as it would appear on paper. So
gotcha.
That's the division or the mix of the 400. It'll be about 200 in Dallas, 140 in Central Texas, and about 40 40 to 60 in Houston. So 380 to 400 is kind of the target. Some of that Dallas work that's in the Dallas P&L is actually in Houston and San Antonio, but the clients are here, and that's how we manage it. So.
Okay. How did you start out in the business? Do you come from a construction management background, from a finance background? Where do you come from?
Well, so I grew up in Louisiana, in Shreveport, Louisiana. I went to school at Texas A&M. When I got there, my family was in the oil and gas and timber business, so extremely volatile. When I got to A&M, I didn't really want to go in the family business in oil and gas, and so I was looking at other options. But I didn't really want to go the business school route, and so I had a number of fraternity brothers who were in the construction department or construction science department at A&M, and I just kind of took some classes. I liked it. It was kind of a combination of, being in the field, but I had a business aspect to it, and so that's what drove me that direction. And then out of school, I got a job. I graduated in '92. The construction market in Texas was pretty miserable at that point. I got a job with a contractor and traveled around with them for a couple of years, and then my wife and I got tired of traveling and decided to move to Dallas, where she had grown up, and so we moved here in '94, and that's what kind of got me here and kept me in Dallas. And I started my career in operations, so I was more field engineering, project engineer, project management, and then about 6 years into my career, I got an opportunity to work for a smaller general contractor and move into a business development role, and that kind of moved me out of operations into more of a business operations, and from there it just kind of moved from there. So I kind of moved out of the operations side of the equation, 5, 6, 7 years into my career, and really shifted my focus.
Gotcha. Yeah, I want to come back to that transition because that can be a challenge for some folks. But let me ask you one question. This is a follow-up to a conversation we had about a month ago when we first talked. When I asked you about some of the common mistakes that construction business owners and managers make, you made a statement that a lot of people run their business like a project, and that causes some problems. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. And I looked at this as an assessment, certainly not an indictment of anyone, because there's a lot of very, very successful people who've done this, and it works well for them. And I think as a business owner or leader, you got to do what works for you. But what I see, and I talk to owners, and this frustrates them, is that owners on the developer owner side, that what I mean when I say that is that you're looking at things, or business owners would look at it, or construction owners or leaders of these companies look at things in a very linear, short-sighted fashion. So, a big construction project's 18, 24, 30 months. And that's kind of the extent, and it's linear, and it's one-dimensional. You have a set of plans. Here's what we're driving to. We're going to get this thing completed. We're going to get a CO. We're going to move on. And then you move on to the next opportunity. And if people have come up through the ranks, right, so field engineer, office engineer, project manager, senior PM, VP, on up the ranks, that's your perspective, right? And so, but businesses are multifaceted, and you've got a lot of things to consider. You have technology, you have HR, you have your issues with banks and issues with financing and issues of how you're going to, with surety, and so it's multifaceted, and it's much more strategic and not as linear, at least from my perspective, is not as linear as running a project. And so, if you run your business like a project, I think you get out of a strategic mindset and get into a tactical mindset, and I think you can just get lost in the weeds sometimes.
So how does one make the transition from that culture that those of us that came up as project engineers, project managers, came up in? How do you change that and stop being so linear and start thinking more three-dimensional?
great question. I think some people, we all have strengths, right? And some people's strengths are in very tactical type things, and some people's are in very strategic, forward thinking. But even if you don't have a strength in strategic mindsets and you're thinking way out, there's methods, I don't call them tricks. I mean, there's things you can do, there's processes you can use to stretch you out of that linear tactical thought process into a more strategic mindset where you're thinking about things a little more globally. And so sometimes it's not just as easy as saying, well, just change the way you think or the way you do things, because it's how you're hardwired. Some people are just hardwired to do that, and what makes them really, really great builders or great construction people, but they may struggle in running their business or leading a business that someone else has charged them with running. So, the process I use, because we have a diverse organization, and I have folks that I need to pull along with me a little bit and kind of help them. I rely on them on a day-to-day level, and I need them to think strategically. So we talk about where do we want to be in, pick your point in the future, 3, 4, 5 years. So there's a clear understanding of where we're headed, and you think at that level, and then understand where you are today and what are all the pieces that go into helping you get there. So So thinking about things more globally, but that's the approach we would use. There's some other pieces of that we can dive into if you want, but I don't think it's as easy, Todd, just to say, well, how do you just flip the switch and start thinking more strategically? Because some people just aren't wired that way, and you got to know who you are and how that self-awareness is a big deal, so you can figure out how you're going to make it work for you. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and one thing that works for me would be, because it's so easy to get bogged down in the tactical, one thing that I've done in the past is just set either monthly or quarterly meetings where we're going to have a strategy session.
Yep.
So you put it on the calendar, and then that forces everybody to focus on the strategic at least for an hour, 2 hours, half a day, whatever the case may be. Meanwhile, all the fires are still burning in the background, but at least you've got focused effort. So that would be one recommendation I would make, would be to just put something on the calendar and do it periodically.
I'll share with you what we've done on our strategic planning process, if you will, and kind of how we tie things together. So I have 12 people on my strategic planning team, my strategic team. It's kind of a mixture of operations and business development and people from each office, and it's leaders in the organization. And I had each of them kind of give me what we call your epic story. So we're at 2020, if we were wildly successful in our organization, what does that look like? And I gave them some prompts, right? So let's talk about revenue, let's talk about earnings, let's talk about headcount, but more, what's the culture look like? What does shared services look like? What's our organizational structure look like? Where are we operating? What market sectors are we really successful in? Maybe we've gotten out of a market sector or two. What are the market sectors that you would want to be in? So I really stretched people and said, close your eyes, and in your mind's eye, what do you want the company to look like in 5 years, 6 years? And so in doing that, we kind of created a composite. And so everyone presented theirs. There's a lot of continuity amongst that. And so we created a company epic story, and we said, this is where we want to be. So we were all very, very clear about the place we were headed, and we had clear expectations about what we wanted that to look like. So not just where we were going, but what did we look like when we got there. And then we had a discussion about what's our current state, and really honestly said, okay, where are we today? And we identified in that epic story some bullet points and so some key points of that, that we wanted to be. And we said on each one of these, where are we today? And that allowed us to kind of have a future state, a current state, and between those we created a gap that said, okay, let's do a kind of a gap analysis and say, what do we need to focus on today? We need to do well in all of these, but maybe safety, our score was 8 out of 10 because we have a really good safety program. We still need to improve it, but it's not the place we need to focus on. Today, maybe we need to focus on people. The biggest gap between us getting from here to there, our 2020 numbers, $600 million in revenue. it's, means 250 people. That's a lot of people we have to bring on board and train. And so we have to really improve our training and development and people strategy. And so that creates our gap, which then feeds into what are we going to do today versus what are we going to do 3 years from now, and start working on that. And then we develop our business plan. Instead of having a 1-year business plan, we have a 2-year rolling plan. And that's where we begin to put our quarterly objectives to say, if we're going to march this thing forward, over the next 2 years to close this gap, to keep us moving forward, what are we going to do around training and development on a quarterly basis? What are we going to do around recruitment and retention on a quarterly basis? And then the other gaps that we had, maybe it was a revenue gap or an increase in a certain market sector, or maybe we want to be in a geographic area. So we kind of march through those things, and then we're meeting on a monthly basis on a conference call as a strategic team. We're reviewing a one-page dashboard that we have to measure that. And then quarterly, we are coming together face-to-face, and we have a bit of a rhythm on those quarterly meetings. And so we don't really focus on the strategic planning on those. It might be a particular topic on a quarterly session, and it kind of coincides with my board meetings that I have with my business partner, and we have an outside board, and those kind of coincide. So we want alignment in our goals with not only what we're doing as a strategic team, but also what the company's, identified, and every employee is driving towards that as well. So that's the process. The other side of that, and this maybe drives into some other questions you have, but what I see some companies doing is a very linear process, which says, well, we're at $250 million today, and we want to be at $400 million by this point, and so that means we got to have 7% growth. So to do 7% growth, we need to get more work that looks like this, and I think that's fine, and I think that's a piece of it, but it's maybe the back end piece of it, not the front end. I think the front end, you've got to get really out there and figure out, where are we going, why are we going there, does it match who we are, and are we in alignment there? So that's how we've done it, and we do have a rhythm. I think rhythms and communication is important. So we have a monthly rhythm, we have a quarterly meeting, a quarterly rhythm, we have an annual rhythm that we're really trying to push and make sure people are thinking about, that ties into the strategic plan, but it doesn't dominate our day-to-day conversations.
Sure. No, I think that's a really good approach, and I like the fact that you've got your strategic team involved with developing the strategy, because I think in so many companies, the strategic objectives get handed down from the ivory tower and to some degree shoved down the throats of the people, which make it hard for them to own. Whereas if they're involved in the process of developing the strategy, then they're going to own that strategy.
We're actually engaging the entire organization. So we're just wrapping up our strategic planning, and so I don't think the whole organizations can be a part of the strategic plan where we're headed. The group of 12 is, and then in the first week of December, if we're having our Christmas party, we're actually having an all-day meeting that day here in Dallas, and everyone for the company is coming together, and they're going to be involved in. We're going to present the gaps that we've identified, and they can weigh in and say, if there's additional gaps that they see at their position, or if they call bunk on something we've presented. I want to hear it. If they don't believe what we've come up with, I want to hear that, and then we're going to charge them with what. It's really more of a business plan, so it's in that 1-year piece. Is what are they going to do individually? What should their department do? What do they need to do, globally, to help close those gaps? What's the 1 or 2 things that they can be doing this coming year? And then we're going to vote on that as a company and let them be engaged in that. And that'll be one of our really big initiatives for the coming year. And so all the employees will have buy-in, or at least have a say in where that is. And I think that creates, a little bit more unity about where you're headed, and they feel like there's a piece of that, and it's not some mysterious thing that, because in my experience, those aren't successful. If the employees are just like, great, here's another, management or leadership initiative that is going to fail, they just hold their breath, they wait for it to go away, and then they just keep doing what they've been doing.
Yeah. I remember it was about 10 years ago, sitting in a meeting hall with the 75 or 100 other people in my division, and the executive came down from Chicago and shared this. Here's the strategic goal for this account for this year. And I asked my manager, all right, that's great. I like it. What can I do where I'm at? What can I do from where I sit to help us get there? And I didn't have an answer.
Yeah.
So there was a big disconnect between the goal, and then what can I do to help us get there. I want to get back to something you talked about, and that's the culture. You talked about the culture of your organization. It sounds like you're very intentional about developing culture. So talk about how important is the culture of an organization, and then does it impact the bottom line, and if so, how?
Well, critically important, yes, and it can impact it in a number of ways. So it does impact the bottom line. Every company has a culture, right? I mean, if you're 4 people, there's a culture. It doesn't matter. There is a culture. I think sometimes it's not what you want it to be, but you have a culture. And so I think you have to be honest as a leader and just say, what is our culture? And you got to know what that is. And it's really how you behave. It's what you see. It's how your company behaves. It's how people interact. And so it's really easy. I'll use the common cliche is, well, we're a family here, or we're a culture of excellence, or it's a buzzword or a thing that leadership has said, well, this is what our culture is, and it's because it's what they want it to be. But then if you dig in and you really start interviewing people and you start talking to people and you start watching the interactions internally and the interactions externally, it's not how you behave. And so I think being honest with yourself of saying, what is our culture truly? And then you can ask yourself, well, what do we want our culture to be? And is there alignment? And if there's not, what are we going to do to fix that? Because I don't have evidence. I don't really understand or know how often culture alignment aligns with what businesses want, but I do know there is disconnect there. So it really is important. I think you have to, as a leader, you got to be honest about what your culture is. What's the good parts of it? What are the parts you want to change? What parts do you want to hold on to? You have to be honest about who you are as a leader. I mean, if you're saying, hey, this is who I am and this is where I want us to be, how are you going to get your organization there and get them to come along and see that vision? So alignments, I think culture is really important. I think you have to have alignment, and then you have to promote the things. And so you celebrate and reward the things you want, and people see that and they understand what that is. And so it affects the bottom line in that if there's a disconnect, so I'll use it to example. If there's a disconnect and as a leadership team, you say, well, we're a culture of excellence, but then you go down and look at accounting or project management or estimating, and you're producing estimates that are wrong, and project management doesn't buy correctly and manage it, and the field doesn't do what they need to do, and accounting misses pay apps or misses invoicing or AP and getting taken care of, and you're not collecting on time. And all of that affects, and people look at it and say, man, I can't rely on you to get my projects built, or you're going to give me a number and it's going to change. That's not a culture of excellence. That's just a culture of mediocrity. And so that disconnect of saying, hey, we're excellent, when in fact you're not, is a real issue. Now, the flip side of that is if you say, because you're out selling, hey, we're this excellent company, and then maybe you're a really good salesperson as a leader, or you really make good relationships, but then the owners say, I hire you because of you, you're not going to get rehired again because they're going to say, well, you're great, I'd love to hire you, but your company stinks. The flip side of that is, you say you are a company of excellence, and you truly are, right? You high level of service. You really deliver. You exceed expectations. There's an alignment with what you're selling and saying, and then the owners, when they hire you, say, "Wow, you are." Well, now they want to hire you and they want to move forward. So I think that disconnect really, you're chasing one-off projects. You're not winning the work you should win. You're certainly, your margins are getting eroded, and you're not being honest about what needs to happen to fix where you want to go. So I think that's how it impacts the bottom line, and I think it's a huge deal.
So what I'm hearing you say is the first step would be, well, one, I think your statement that every company has a culture probably opens some eyes. But what I'm hearing you say is the first step to fix your culture is to do an honest assessment of where you're at, and then decide where do you want to be, and then figure out, much like your business plan, how do you get there? The strategy, you got to find out where you're at on the roadmap, know where you want to go, and then figure out your game plan or the route you're going to take to get there. And my experience has been a lot of people in construction especially that just doesn't interest them that much. They'd much rather go out and pull levers and drive nails and do things that are more tactical, easier to handle, rather than this touchy-feely, ethereal type cultural stuff.
And that's where, honestly, if you go back to running your company like a construction project, it's easier, right, than running it like a business and spending time on these things, because it's easy to lose. I mean, it's really easy to start these initiatives and then lose them in the execution, right? So creating strategic plans are easy. Executing those strategic plans are difficult. A lot of plans are not executable. You create these great, slick-looking things that have, even if they have buy-in, if they're not executable, they go away. I'm a member of a group, and they had a guy that was in there, and he talked about their strategic planning. We brought in a gentleman, and he used a really simple process, and I thought it was really kind of cool to figure out the culture he wanted and where he wanted to be.
We'll get back to the interview in just a few minutes, but first I have a resource I want to share with you. Okay, we have Dan Connery, Vice President of Business Development from Newforma, on the line with us again, and Dan has some advice and tips for you on applying lean practices in construction. So, Dan, a couple of questions for you. Last time, we talked about your perspective on the adoption of lean in construction. Today, let's talk about why contractors should even care. I mean, ultimately, why should they care about lean if they're not already using it?
So, from our perspective, Todd, it's about the 3 Ps: people, productivity, and profit. Contractors' ability to win new projects will be adversely affected if they choose to bury their head in the sand with regards to lean. What we're seeing is the number of new projects that are being issued by owners are requiring lean more and more. And therefore, if contractors don't start seriously thinking about lean, I think they're in serious trouble as far as staying in business.
So why is that? What's behind this?
Sure. So what we're seeing, literally in the field seeing with contractors who are adopting lean, is that lean is allowing contractors to deliver more value at a lower cost. And the reasons behind that are, there are studies that show that lean construction companies have safer work sites. They deliver a better quality product. The employees and subcontractors are happier, and happier people produce more. Subcontractors are actually starting to provide lower bids to contractors who apply lean because those contractors are more predictable. So a lot of lean is about predictability. And therefore, those contractors that are practicing lean will deliver more value at a lower cost.
Gotcha. So this is sort of like years back when owners started caring about contractor safety records. They recognized that there is a direct connection between cost, quality, and safety. So now owners are recognizing that there's a connection between their end product, the cost they pay, and those contractors that are using lean. So let's assume that you've done your job and you've convinced the folks listening that lean matters. Then how do the contractors go to the next step and then assess where they even are with lean?
Sure. So we use internally a 5-point scale. So what we call level 0 through level 4. And level 0 folks are those who don't know about lean or just simply don't care. So they know about it, but they just don't care. They're not interested. Level 1 are those companies that have someone inside the company, or maybe it's a group, maybe it's a particular unit inside the company that is really thinking about lean, but the company itself is yet not adopted. Level 2 and 3 represent companies that are serious about continually improving themselves. And then level 4 are those that don't even think about lean. It's just a natural part of who they are, and it's like breathing for you and I.
Interesting. So for the folks that are interested in moving forward with lean because they recognize the need, what are some of the most common challenges that they encounter as they move through these levels? What should they be prepared to deal with?
Absolutely. So the first thing, of course, is assess yourself along that scale that we just talked about, from a level 0 to a level 4. And then ask yourself, what can I learn from contractors that are at higher levels than me, that are ahead of me? And so the challenges that you're going to experience are based on the level you're currently sitting at and the level you're striving to get to. So if you're level 0 to 1, the challenge here is actually just admitting there's a better way. So I've had people tell me when I talk about lean that I've been in this business for 30 years. There's nothing wrong with what I'm doing. Why do I have to change? And I thought my answer to that is that people used to ask the same question about the airplane and the automobile, but I don't see people riding horses that often to work.
Right.
So then you're like level 1 to 2. Here it's time to learn to use some new muscles, because I will admit, lean is different. The way you think about lean is different. So you got to practice new muscle memory. And this is when we actually suggest companies go and look for consultants to help them. There are companies that specialize in helping companies implement lean. And the good news is that many of the companies that are already ahead, there are many companies already ahead, which means there's a lot of lessons learned that consultants can pass along to those that are further behind. So that's the good news. The bad news is you're behind. So this is also a great time to start using stickies for visual planning. So stickies on a wall, because it's a very simple concept to understand. It's a very low cost to implement. And really, honestly, from our perspective, and this may surprise you as a software company, we think that if you're at level 1 to 2, it's not the right time to put software into the mix. It's too early. So 2 and beyond, once you've hit level 2, it's time to start looking at software to help accelerate your journey. Because now you understand the methodology, you really believe in it, and therefore you're looking for ways to improve. And each level after 2 is really how deeply in your company have you adopted lean, not only inside your company, but how much do you influence others on your project team, the subcontractors, the owner, the architect, to actually get them to adopt lean. So you become a lean evangelist at that point. And how much does lean thinking permeate your company's culture? Because lean is a journey that never ends. Because lean at its core is a journey of continuous improvement that can only end once we are perfect.
And that's probably not going to happen. So for those that are ready to adopt the digital processes, I understand that Newforma has recently launched a new product that you call Lean Planner. Could you tell us a little bit about what that is and then what some of the benefits your customers are already realizing with it?
Yeah, absolutely. So Lean Planner, at its most basic concept, is a visual planning and commitment tracking solution. What it does is it eliminates all of the issues that come with the analog process. In other words, stickies on a wall. With stickies on a wall, you have delays and updates because you have to actually be at the wall to put the sticky on the wall. I have to be looking at a sticky for me to know you updated that sticky. You have to be in the same location. There's physical space. You actually have to have a wall, and walls have a certain length, and once you run out of a wall, then you're in trouble. And we've actually had instances of stickies falling off the wall. So just over time, the glue lets go, and now you walk into the room and there's stickies all over the floor. And so we eliminate all those challenges because it's all digital now. So the rapid growing in interest in lean methodologies to us indicates that visual planning tools such as Lean Planner will have an even larger impact in our industry than building information modeling did a decade ago.
Very interesting. Well, Dan, I appreciate you taking a few minutes to share your thoughts on lean methodology as it applies to construction with the audience. So if you want to learn more about Lean Planner, go to newforma.com/lean. Dan, thanks a lot for sharing, and we'll talk to you next time.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Now, let's get back to the interview with Will Hodges.
I'm a member of a group, and they had a guy that was in there, and he talked about their strategic planning. We brought in a gentleman, and he used a really simple process, and I thought it was really kind of cool to figure out the culture he wanted and where he wanted to be. And he basically just took a piece of paper, a college ruled piece of paper, and he wrote on that the things that just really, really drove him nuts. So what are the things that just eat away at me? So, I mean, it could be, whatever it was in his business. He had like a moving company or something, but it was just things in there that just drove him nuts and just ate him alive, and he just couldn't let go of. And those were things that, he said, I got to drive these out of my organization. And then he looked at the things that really just made him happy and satisfied and drove him and created passion with him. And he just said that's what he wants to promote. That's the culture he wants to promote within his organization. And those others are the pieces he wants to drive out of his organization. And it was just a really simple way to say, this is what I want. This is what I want to have. And then he could go through and look at it and say, okay, well, this, and this on the bad stuff is occurring here. How do we get rid of that? And this good stuff is happening. How do we promote that? And it was a really simple, not bringing in 30 consultants to spend $500,000 to tell you what you already know yourself. So I like that.
I think I like that process, kind of an 80-20 approach to changing the culture of your organization. I want to go back to something you talked about. You mentioned workforce development as being one of the keys to filling in the gap for your company getting from where you are today to where you want to be. And I would say it's probably the same for everybody across the board. And it's also an issue that that's really challenging the industry as a whole right now and probably in the long term. If you would talk about the importance of workforce development, and then really where's your company focusing your efforts at on workforce development?
Well, I don't know if there's a construction executive out there that wouldn't say that's the single biggest issue facing our industry, whether it's a general contractor or a subcontractor. I mean, it is. And I think there's pockets of places that are trying to be really proactive in addressing that. I'm on the board of the AGC, ABC, we do a combo here in Dallas, and I'm on the board and on the executive committee, and we're really taking a big push on that. We're really trying to figure out how do we get industry to the high schools and provide opportunities for them and really show them a pathway to, especially at the trade level, where they can be really successful and do great things. And so we're looking at that at what I would consider the GC professional level at a project manager or superintendent is, it's college recruitment, it's maybe technical trade school recruitment. It's what we're seeing is a shift. 10, 15, 20 years ago, it was, you show up on a recruitment day in the spring, you're looking for maybe December grads, maybe May grads, you're hiring project engineers, or whatever your entry level classification is in your organization. You hire them and you throw them in the fire, and hopefully someone emerges. What shifted is the level of internship programs that people are doing, and I think we're starting as an industry. We're looking at what's happening outside of our industry, whether it's in business or other fields, and so coming out of the business schools. So the level of the internship programs have really increased dramatically. And so a lot of recruiting, the vast majority of these interns, once they do their internship, they're getting an offer at the end of that. It's a 8 to 12 week interview process and a recruitment process, and you get to figure out if it's the type of person you want in your organization. And so we're really pushing to have a significant amount of interns on a 12-month basis. So I've challenged my HR team and my operations team. I'd like to have 30 interns in our organization on a 12-month basis. So, you probably summers you may have 15, so you may have 7 or 8 in the spring, 15 or 18 in the summer, and then some others in the fall. But I'd really like to have 30, because I think out of that 30, some percentage are going to be people we don't want. They're going to flame out, or be guys or gals that we say don't fit. So out of that 30, if we had 20 that we wanted to make offers to, we extend those offers, we probably have 15, and that kind of matches up with the amount of hires we need to be making on a yearly basis. So, so we're really pushing that side of the equation. And then on the development side, we've hired a person specific to handle our training and development program. We're creating programs right now today around starting at the entry level to train them on what we want to see, the behaviors we want to see, the type things we want them to be focused on, because schools do a great job of giving a baseline, but there's a lot of things around risk that they don't teach. There's a lot of things about just how we want to operate as our business that they don't teach, and so we want to train them, these entry-level guys and gals, in that. We also do a bit of a rotational assignment, so I want them, a lot of people want to go the PM route. We want to make sure that they're experiencing. It's probably about a 3-year rotation, so I want them spending 50% of their time in the field. I'd like them to spend 25% of their time in the project management role, or working for a PM, that side of the equation. I'd like them to spend 25% of their time in estimating. Hopefully it's all kind of integrated, so it's not happening in vacuums of those departments. They're kind of doing all of it. The superintendent's probably my biggest concern. I mean, we'll have project managers. I'm not overly concerned about that side of the equation. Superintendents really concern me. If you interview a superintendent who's late 40s or older, they came out of either the carpenters, they were either a carpenter, 90% of them, 95% of them were carpenters or field engineers. And so as field engineers back in the 70s and 80s, they were doing layout. They started to lay out the site, and then they would do layout all the way through the building, right? So they were laying out walls and doors and everything in the building. So they saw a project go together, and so they learned how a project came together. And then the really good ones, a superintendent would would see that guy and then pull him in and say, hey, you ought to come over here and be on the GC side or work for or move your way up as an assistant superintendent, and they would go that route. Same thing on the carpenters. They were on the job from the beginning all the way through the end, and they saw the whole process. Well, we've become so specialized as an industry and outsourced all of that from a risk perspective. There are no, those paths are not available to us anymore, generally around especially in Texas. And so we've got to find our superintendents out of colleges, and we've got to train them. And while we still have that core group of knowledge and wisdom in the industry and that intellectual property that's there, we have to bring these young people on and train them and bring them along as best we can. So that's my biggest concern, is making sure we have that pipeline of guys going in the field, super talented, super educated. They're really good guys, and I think we're seeing the bar raise in terms of ability there, but we got to keep pushing it.
Agreed, definitely. I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier when you were talking about your career. You said you started out in operations, project management, then you transitioned into a business development role, and then moved your way up to where you're at today. What advice would you give to someone who really feels the calling to be in leadership, or they want to be in leadership and take on a more strategic role in a company? What are some of the key skills that they need to pick up? What are the roles that they need to spend some time in? Or what other advice would you give them so that they can put the tools in their tool belt to be ready to fill that senior leader spot?
Well, I think the tool analogy is a great one. I think that, if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? You've heard that saying. So you got to, and if all you ever use is a hammer, then you're just going to, that's how you're going to approach things. So if operations if you're one dimensional, it's all operations, all operations, you're going to discount the marketing side of the equation, or you're going to discount the business development side or other pieces of it. So my advice would be to experience as many facets of the organization. So if you say, hey, I really want to be the leader of a large construction company, or I want to start my own construction company or something like that, I would say get your operational experience out of the gate, right? So I would say when you come out, try to get on a myriad of projects, try to work with a variety of people, get good experience, and get a good solid underpinning of operation experience. Understand, the estimating side of the equation as best you can. And then I think you need to begin to branch out from that a little bit. If I were telling someone to, if you have the natural talent and skill sets to do sales or business development, you ought to try to explore that a little bit. I think if you're a salesperson with an operational background, your credibility is a lot higher than someone that's just a business development person. I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but doesn't have that operational background. So you obviously can raise the bar there. And then I think if you do business development, then you have an appreciation for what marketing does. Marketing departments get dismissed a lot in operational businesses. I think they're raising in importance from where they were 10, 15 years ago. But if you're in business development, you have a much keener sense of what they do and how much they can support what you're trying to do. I think having a sense of IT, having a sense of HR. So, if you get an opportunity to do special projects, and when I mean special projects, like if your company has an initiative where they're going to explore, a particular IT initiative or software, if you can get on that, because you get to see certain things. If your HR department's looking at training and development and you can get a part of maybe planning a program or being involved in that, you ought to try to get involved in that. So the more you can broaden your experience and have a perspective and some diversity, the earlier, in your first 10 to 15 years, I just think you're much more valuable and you have a different perspective on how to run business.
Yeah, I agree completely. That was one of the mistakes that I made early in my career. I was so operationally focused, I didn't have much appreciation for anything outside of my wheelhouse. But as I've gotten older and wiser and realized how young and stupid I was, I realized I realize that a little diversity helps. And then the other thing that really helps, well, two things. One, take a long-term approach. Look at it as a long game. Look at your career as a long-term initiative, and then also realize that one of the most beneficial and maybe important things of taking a rotational approach is you're going to develop a lot of relationships with those people that one day you might be leading, and the relationships could be equally or more important than the skills you pick up in that rotation.
I think that's great advice. I think that if I were, and you and I talked about this the last time, so I'll just maybe jump ahead. If I were to go back in time and give myself a piece of advice, that's one of the things I would say is start those relationships. I mean, I was able to do it in my late 20s, but I would say push it even earlier than that. As soon as you come out of school, really pay attention to the architects you're working with on site. Pay attention to the subcontractors that you look at and you're meeting with, because 20 years down the road, the guy that you developed that relationship with and you went out and had beers with after the job, or that you went on a fishing trip with, or you went and played golf with, or you can develop those relationships. You're going to be running a business, and that guy's going to be running a business, and you can pick up the phone and call. And even if it's been 15 or 20 years, they're going to answer your call. And so developing those relationships with your peers at an early age, you're going to be the future leaders of your industry, and it's a lot easier to do that. And not just within the construction. I mean, get in industry associations, so get in real estate council stuff, or get in other things outside, so you're interacting with architects and developers and other people your age. And then 15, 20 years down the road, I promise you it'll pay dividends. And then the next piece of that is have patience. It takes time, and you're just going to have some patience in that. I think I shared this with you. A guy, I was looking to buy a business before I came on board with Cadence, and I had a M&A firm that was doing some work for me, and there was a guy there that had worked for the Walton family on a personal level, and he had a saying, and it's not, I don't think he owned it, but he shared it with me, and I've used it, is, your 20s and 30s is learn, your 40s and 50s is your time to earn, and then your 60s and 70s and beyond is your opportunity to return. So learn, earn, return. And that's true. I think too much people focus on earn in their 20s and 30s versus learn. I would say focus on learn early, and then you'll have your earning potential is really in your 40s and 50s, and you can really make big headway there. So don't, you can chase opportunities, you can chase whatever you want to chase, but make it about learning when you're early. Don't make it you got to earn money, but you'll have more potential if you really get a good base.
Yeah, I certainly wish I had taken that advice back in my 20s, because I was so short. Well, I've shared this before on the podcast, but one of my flaws was I realized that I was always trying to get to the next thing, always trying to get to the next project, get to the next bigger project, get the promotion, start my own business, etc. And I really did myself and the people around me a disservice by always looking ahead and not being present with where I was. So, yeah, I really like that. Learn, earn, and return.
Just to play on that just for a real quick second, I got an opportunity to speak to a couple of different groups at A&M. I spoke to their ABC chapter, and then I spoke to a graduate level class the next day. But and I share this with young entry level people that we're interviewing. I share this with my kids. I share this with anyone I can that are in that piece. You're so focused on what I call rock hopping, and if you think about I say this to the kids at A&M when I'm talking to them. We're really good. The school's really good at giving you this perspective of, you're going to graduate. You're going to go to school as a project engineer, assistant PM, senior PM, VP of operations, president, CEO, retire at 30. It doesn't work that way. I'm just going to, let me just be the wet blanket in this room and tell you it doesn't happen that way. And if all you're thinking about is rock hopping, right? So I get this job, this job, this job, this job. You might find yourself in the middle of the river on the last rock, and there's nowhere to go. Mm-hmm. And so when I'm interviewing young people 25 and under, the question I ask them is, where do you want to be in 20 years? Have you even considered where you want to be when you're 45? When you're 20, 25, 20, 45 seems really old. I can tell you right now it's not, right? So where do you want to be in 20 or 25 years? Have you given thoughts? So the same thing we're talking about for strategic planning for your business. You ought to have strategic planning for yourself. If you're in your early 20s, where do you want to be 20 years from now, and what do you need to do to get there? And have a plan for your trajectory. So if you say, I want to own a business, and that's your real piece, then you got to think about what are you going to need to do along the next 15, 20 years to do that. Or I want to do something else. So give some thought to that and have some quiet reflection and really be honest with yourself about what it is you want to do and what's going to make you, give you passion to come to work every day. I can say I've probably had, out of the 50 people that I've challenged with that in the last couple of years, I'd probably have one that truly understands that. The vast majority have never thought about it. And I just tell them, I said, do a favor to yourself and the company you're working for, you hope to go to work for, have an understanding of that and be honest and tell them that. Most people aren't going to be intimidated by it. And if they are, then you might be going to work for the wrong company. So.
No, that's good advice. And one thing I try to remind myself of, I try to look at work differently now than I did 20 years ago. And a lot of it's due to a guy I worked with. I interviewed him on the podcast. His name's Greg Lazinski, engineering background, construction operations, but he was the best at developing relationships. Mm-hmm. And I had the opportunity to work with him for just a short time. But now I try to think, whatever project I'm working on, whatever initiative I'm in, really the long-term benefit, the most long-term benefit and value is going to come out of the relationships I develop during that process. Not about the earnings, not about the promotion, the awards, whatever. The most benefit is going to come out of the relationships, and if I'll focus on that, then really no matter what happens, I'm going to come out ahead.
I think that's exactly right.
You talked about an equation when we talked a few weeks ago. Performance plus behavior equals results. What in the world does that mean?
So, I don't know that this is this in my opinion, this formula works everywhere. I can't be sure that it came out of GE, but the lady that shared it with me and taught me about it certainly was a GE devotee, so it very much could have come out of that. I really don't know who owns it, but I've certainly claimed it as something that I use. Results are what matter, right? So if you're looking at an individual's performance or a company or an individual initiative or a company initiative or a project or whatever, let's talk about the end result we want to see, right? We focus so much on in our industry about performance reviews, right? So we focus in on, are you doing the task correctly, and are you dotting this I, and are you crossing this T, and did you produce the the right fee and all those things. And what happens is we focus on the performance side and we miss the behavior side. And so and behaviors are behaviors just can be a lot of different things. It can be decision making, judgment, communication, leadership, the ability to assess, all sorts of things. So company that I ran a division for previously, I used this and I really went through, and it's kind of like the culture thing. It kind of ties back into culture. What are the behaviors that were valuable to me within our organization? So it was decision making, directness, the ability to be direct, judgment, leadership, the ability to assess. Those were the things that I looked at for my team. And so taking those behaviors and combining them with performance give us the results we want. And all too often, one or the others isn't in place, right? So maybe we have, and we've all seen this guy, right, as superintendent or project manager. Man, his job is make money. He's a hard driver. Performance is great, but man, does he have some bad behaviors, right? Pain in the ass. No one wants to work with him. I call them snipers, right? No one wants to work with them, and that you never know when you're going to get shot out of the saddle, and you're always looking over your shoulder. So that bad behavior. And so what happens is the moment that individual doesn't get the results that you want to see, there are plenty of detractors ready to undermine that individual. And ultimately, they're going to fire themselves. It's behaviors are what gets people fired, right? So there's that. Or you have the other one is you have the guy that's got great behaviors, but his performance lags. So now you've got to spend some time trying to raise those performance behaviors. But in my mind, you have to focus. You have to look at both. Because if you have an office full of great performers and bad behavior, you're not going to have the culture you want. People aren't going to want to be working there, and you might produce earnings, but you're not going to have something that's sustainable that you can hold as a company that over time is going to work, because it'll be a revolving door of people, and that's what that means, performance plus behavior. So you can't just ignore the behavior side. You got to look at results you want and the combination of the two that give you the results you want.
Yeah, so you got to not only look at the hard skills, but also look at those soft skills, the emotional intelligence, self-awareness, being able to communicate, deal with conflict, all those things that generally aren't taught in school.
All those things. And it goes back to that, running your business like a project. Well, I've got a superintendent, he's a pain in the ass. Well, let's just get him out in the field because he's going to build the hell out of that project. All right, great. But, then all of a sudden you get 10 of those guys and that's all you have. Well, I can't put them with any of the owners because the owners I want are getting more sophisticated. Right. Now you find yourself in a box. So the soft side of that is just something we're not, as an industry generally, we're not really good at addressing. And I think that, owners are becoming more discerning and more demanding, and I think we've got to up our game.
Yeah, definitely. Let's shift gears a little bit. You've made the statement that the construction industry is sometimes guilty of having a herd mentality. Mm-hmm. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so I think if you're depending what sector, market sectors or geography you might be in, so you're watching what everyone else is doing, and so who am I competing with, and so who am I competing with on this project? Well, where are their fees going to be? What am I going to have to do to win this? And all of a sudden, everyone's moving to an area saying, well, they're chasing this type of work, or they're chasing this type of work, and I'm concerning myself more with what everyone around me is doing rather than what my plan is and what we ought to be doing as a company, right? And so if they're doing it, it must be good, so let's go do what they're doing. And you find yourself bouncing from place to place to place without really a thought process and a strategy for where you're going. So you're moving. The other piece of that is it's a herd mentality, and decision-making is driven by fear, right? So instead of having strategy and having a strategy in place, and your decision-making is done against your strategy that says, where are we going, why do we want to be there, and how does this interact with that? You just look up and say, well, everyone's chasing schools, and the fees on that are 1.5%. Well, we need to be at 1.4. Well, that's a decision making that, well, if we don't do that, we're not going to win the job. If we don't win the job, we're going to have any work. And look at all these people we have. We got to continue to do that. And everyone's doing schools, and that's where the work is. So let's go do that. Well, that's a recipe for disaster. I mean, that's unsustainable, and you're going to find yourself really fighting or not making money, and it just puts you in this doom loop, right? So if you've got a strategy and you know where you're going and why you're going there and what needs to happen, you make your decisions, and then you say, we're not going to go chase that opportunity because it doesn't support our overall strategy. Now, you got to go find the opportunities that support your strategy. And if you've thought about your strategy and you know where you're going, and you don't worry about what anyone else is doing, you just worry about what you're doing, and it's a good plan and you've thought through it, you stick with that. Doesn't mean you don't adjust. I mean, you may have to adjust on the fly, but adjust based on what's happening with you, not what's happening with everyone else. And that's what I think happens. I think in our industry, there's a lot of groupthink. There's a lot of that herd mentality. And then you get into this, what's it going to take to win the job? Because if we don't win the job, we're done. That's what we try to avoid. We find ourselves in that, but it gives us pause to say, time out. If we're going to take this job at a lower fee, at least it's a conscious decision, and we understand the impact on our strategy versus just a blind process.
Yeah, I think the acronym is FOMO, FOMO, fear of missing out.
Yeah.
We chase these opportunities because what if we don't get it?
Yeah.
And instead of being strategic and saying, you know what, it's not in our kill zone right now, so we're not going to go after it.
Well, listen, in the Texas market today, there's a ton of work. You got to, if you're thoughtful about what you're pursuing, you can do really well. If that will turn. I mean, I think anyone that says this is going to last forever is fooling themselves. There will be a turn. We think it's probably 3 years out. Could be 2.5, could be 3.5, but it's out there. So how are you going to react to that? And if you're planning for that and you understand it, then you make whatever adjustments you need to make internally, or go find other markets, or but at least it's a conscious thought process to what you're doing and why you might be reducing fees, or how you might be adjusting headcount, or whatever it is you need to do. But you're intentional about it, and it's not just an accommodation; it's an intentional thought.
Good advice. One last question. We're about to run out of time. I want to ask you one last question and then give you an opportunity to share how people can find out more about your company and connect with you individually. But that question would be, let's say you had an opportunity to speak to a room of 500 construction business owners, and you could give them one or two pieces of advice. What would that be?
Yeah, so I think, there's a couple. One, I would just challenge you to understand who you are. So who are you? Who are you? What do you want your company to be? Where are you headed? And then, does your company match who you are? Just really honestly assess that. And so, if you can get those two things right, you kind of figure out who you are, where do you want to be, and where your company is. That'll be a bit of the culture piece. And then I would say, if you think forward in the future, do you know where you're going and why? So I think it's just some self-reflection to look at those things and figure it out. And I think being honest with who you are and where you're going. I read a quote last night. It's great, and I'm quoting it to a few people, but I think it's kind of it's a quote about knowledge and wisdom, and I think it factors into this. It said, "Knowledge is knowing that tomatoes are fruit. Wisdom's knowing not to use it in a fruit salad."
It's good.
And I think that's what we're dealing with here. Is I think a lot of people have knowledge about the industry, but I think you got to create some wisdom about why are you going to put all these things together and how are you going to utilize them. And so I think just being some honest self-reflection can give you a little bit of wisdom about where you're headed.
That's good advice. That's good advice. Anything else you want to share with the group before we wrap it up?
No, it's been a pleasure to chat with you. I'm certainly, anyone's welcome to reach out if you got a question or you're curious about something or you just want to. I'm always happy to hear counter thoughts. So if you call me and think I'm full of BS, you're certainly welcome to share it with me, and I'm happy to hear it. My email address is whodges@cadencemcsshane.com. CadenceMcShane.com is our website. It's easy to find us. So you're welcome to get me there. Catch me on LinkedIn. It's really easy to find me on LinkedIn, and you can certainly reach out, send me a message on LinkedIn. I'm very open to who I accept. I'm a believer of more is better than less on that, because I think you can connect with a lot of people and share a lot of ideas. So follow me there, and then if you want to, you can catch me on Twitter as well. So it's at Will Hodges CMC.
Got it. Well, I'll have links to your email address and your company website, LinkedIn, and a link to your Twitter profile as well for folks who are listening. So great stuff, Will. I really appreciate it. And let me know if there's ever anything I could do for you.
Absolutely, Todd. I appreciate it. And if you're ever in Dallas, look me up.
Right on. Thank you.
Thanks, man. Bye-bye.
To get the show notes for this episode, go to constructionleadingedge.com/037. This is episode 37. Follow me on Twitter at conleadedge. Shoot me an email if you want, todd@constructionleadingedge.com. My name is Todd DeWalt. Thanks for listening. See you next time.